Three rich men refuse to pay the black waitress until the Korean mafia boss shows up behind them. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Now let's jump right back in. The evening sky had surrendered to darkness by the time Kendra Lawson pushed through the employee entrance of La Maison Dorée. She had 7 minutes before her shift started, and she couldn't afford to be late. She caught her reflection in her locker mirror and paused. Her dark skin glowed under the fluorescent light, smooth and rich. Her eyes, large and expressive, held a certain sadness, a melancholy etched into her features even when she smiled. It was a haunting beauty, the kind that made people look twice. People often mistook her quietness for fragility. They were wrong. Kendra Lawson was steel-wrapped in silk. She pulled her coily hair into a neat ponytail and smoothed her uniform. Tonight felt different somehow. There was a heaviness in her chest she couldn't shake, lingering since she'd found the eviction notice that morning. 30 days to come up with 2 months of back rent. $2,400 she didn't have. La Maison Dorée catered to a particular clientele. The dining room featured chandeliers and white linen tablecloths. The patrons matched the setting, women in gowns, men in suits, jewelry catching light. This was where certain people came to see and be seen. And then there was Kendra, weaving between tables, invisible to most of them. "New table in your section," the floor manager said. "Table 12's and 3 businessmen. They seem demanding." Kendra nodded. She'd handled demanding before. Table 12 was positioned near the center of the dining room. As Kendra approached, she assessed the 3 men seated there. Their suits were expensive, hand-stitched. Their arrogance radiated like heat. The leader, Trent Whitmore III, had cold blue eyes and a jaw that was strong but cruel. To his left sat Hunter Collins, lean with a permanent smirk. The third, Spencer Crawford, was broad-shouldered with the build of a former athlete gone soft. "Good evening, gentlemen. I'm Kendra. Can I start you with drinks?" Trent didn't look up from his phone. "Bottle of 2010 Chateau Margaux. Make sure it's actually 2010. She turned to leave, but Hunter's voice stopped her. "You're pretty," he said, eyes raking over her. "For a waitress, don't you think that—" "Trent?" Trent finally looked up, studying her with clinical detachment. "She's all right. A bit plain for my taste. The real beauties sit at the tables, not serve them." Spencer laughed loudly. Kendra felt the words cut against her skin, but she didn't flinch. Men like this fed on reactions. "I'll get your wine," she said simply. At the far end of the restaurant, in a corner booth, a man sat alone. Park Min-ho was handsome in a severe way. Sharp cheekbones, dark eyes that absorbed light, black hair swept back from a face that rarely smiled. He wore a dark suit, a single silver ring on his right hand. What the staff didn't know was that Min-ho operated in worlds most people never glimpsed. He had interests in various industries throughout the city, some entirely legitimate, others operating in grayer areas that required discretion and connections that extended far beyond ordinary business relationships. He'd noticed Kendra on his first visit 8 weeks ago. Something about her caught his attention. How she carried herself under pressure. Her warm but guarded smile. Those sad eyes that held worlds of pain and resilience. He'd been returning every Friday since, watching her handle difficult customers with dignity she shouldn't have to summon. Now, watching her deal with these 3 men, he felt something stir inside him. Anger. Pure, cold, dangerous anger. The night wore on. The men sent back wine, complained about food temperatures, found fault with everything. Through it all, they made sure Kendra knew how insignificant they found her. "Sweetheart, this bread is stale. Too complicated for you? My water glass has been empty for 30 seconds. What are we paying you for?" Kendra absorbed it without complaint, but something inside her was cracking. She thought about the eviction notice, her mother's sacrifices, the exam she hadn't studied for. Finally, Trent leaned back with a cruel smile. "We've made a decision. We're not paying. Consider it a lesson in customer service. Kendra's heart pounded. Over $2,000. If they walked, it would come from her wages. Sir, please. I could lose my job. That's a you problem, Hunter said. Trent pulled out $100 bill and dropped it at his feet. Get on your knees and pick it up. Show everyone how much you need it. The room went silent. Kendra stared at the bill. $100 that would help with rent. But the cost of her dignity, her humanity, of kneeling before this man. She thought about her mother, who had scrubbed floors so Kendra could stand tall. No, she said quietly. Trent's eyebrows rose. Excuse me? I said no. Her voice was stronger now. I won't do it. You're bullies. Cowards who use money to make people feel small. But I'm not small. And I won't kneel for you. Fury flashed in Trent's eyes. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I know exactly who I'm dealing with. The tension was suffocating. Then, from behind Trent came a voice. She won't have to. The voice was calm, quiet, and absolutely terrifying. A man had materialized behind the businessmen, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark eyes burning with cold fury. Kendra recognized him, the quiet regular from the corner booth. Trent sneered without turning. Who the hell is this? Another server begging for scraps? The man stepped closer. The temperature seemed to drop. My name is Park Minho, he said softly, and you have made a very serious mistake. The name hung in the air like gun smoke. Park Minho. It meant nothing to Kendra, but she watched as the color drained from Hunter's face. Spencer's smug expression crumbled into something resembling terror. Only Trent remained defiant, though a flicker of uncertainty crossed his features. Park Minho, Hunter repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. As in the Park family? Minho didn't respond. He didn't need to. His silence was confirmation enough. Trent finally turned in his seat, and Kendra watched his arrogance falter as he took in the man standing behind him. Minho's presence was overwhelming up close. He radiated power, impossible to ignore and dangerous to challenge. I don't know who you think you are, Trent said, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. This is a private matter between us and the waitress. It was a private matter, Minho said calmly, until you made it public by humiliating her in front of an entire restaurant, until you dropped money at her feet like she was a beggar, until you tried to break a woman who has more dignity in her smallest finger than you have in your entire bloodline. The words were delivered without emotion, without heat. That made them infinitely more terrifying. Spencer pushed back from the table, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Look, man, we don't want any trouble. We were just having some fun. Fun, Minho repeated, tasting the word like something bitter. Is that what you call it? Interesting. I have a different definition of fun. Would you like me to show you? Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The entire restaurant had become a frozen tableau, every patron and server watching the scene unfold with a mixture of fear and fascination. This was not normal. This was not how Friday nights at La Maison Dorée usually went. Minho reached into his jacket pocket, and all three men flinched. But instead of a weapon, he pulled out a phone. He scrolled through his contacts with casual indifference, as if he had all the time in the world. Trent Whitmore III, he said, reading from the screen. Son of Trent Whitmore Jr., CEO of Whitmore Development. Your father's company just secured a contract with the city for that new waterfront project, didn't it? $200 million. Trent's face went pale. How do you know that? I know everything that happens in this city. Minho looked up from his phone, his dark eyes pinning Trent in place. I know your father's company is leveraged to the breaking point. I know that waterfront project is the only thing keeping Whitmore Development from bankruptcy. And I know that project requires permits and approvals from people who owe me favors. He let that sink in for a moment before continuing. I also know your father's personal cell phone number. Would you like me to call him? I'm sure he'd be interested to hear how his son spent his Friday evening, humiliating service workers, refusing to pay his bill, trying to force a young woman to kneel at his feet for entertainment. You wouldn't, Trent said, but his voice cracked on the second word. Minho smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. I would. I will. In fact, I'm doing it right now. He pressed a button and held the phone to his ear. The silence in the restaurant was so complete that Kendra could hear the faint sound of ringing from across the table. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3. Hello? A voice answered, tinny and distant, but audible. Mr. Whitmore, Minho said, his tone shifting to something almost cordial. This is Park Minho. I apologize for calling so late, but we have a situation that requires your immediate attention. Kendra watched Trent's face cycle through emotions, disbelief, fear, and finally desperate panic. He reached for the phone, but Minho stepped back smoothly, keeping it out of reach. Your son is currently at La Maison Dorée, Minho continued. He and his friends have run up quite a bill, over $2,000, I believe. They've informed their server that they have no intention of paying. They've also spent the evening verbally abusing her and most recently attempted to force her to kneel and pick money up off the floor for their amusement. The voice on the other end exploded into sound. Kendra couldn't make out the words, but the fury was unmistakable. Trent shrank in his seat, looking suddenly very young and very small. I'm glad you understand the severity of the situation, Minho said smoothly. I suggest you have a conversation with your son about appropriate behavior. And Mr. Whitmore? I expect he will apologize to this young woman, sincerely, publicly, or our next conversation will be about those permits your company needs so desperately. He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. The silence that followed was deafening. Trent stared at the table, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. Hunter looked like he might be sick. Spencer was visibly trembling. Now then, Minho said, his voice returning to that terrifying calm. I believe you owe this woman an apology. Trent didn't move. His jaw was clenched, his hands fisted at his sides. Even now, even after everything, some part of him resisted the idea of apologizing to someone he considered beneath him. Minho leaned down, bringing his face close to Trent's ear. Whatever he whispered was too quiet for Kendra to hear, but the effect was immediate. What little color remained in Trent's face disappeared completely. He stood up so quickly he nearly knocked over his chair. I'm sorry, he said to Kendra, the words forced through gritted teeth. Look at her when you apologize, Minho commanded. Trent raised his eyes to meet Kendra's. She saw hatred there, and humiliation and impotent rage. But underneath all of that, she saw fear. Real, genuine fear of the man standing behind him. I'm sorry, Trent repeated, his voice slightly stronger. For everything. The way we treated you tonight was inexcusable. It won't happen again. And your friends? Minho prompted. Hunter and Spencer stumbled over each other in their haste to apologize. Their words blurred together into a stream of regret and promises to do better. Kendra barely heard them. She was still processing what had just happened, still trying to understand how her night had transformed so completely. The bill, Minho said when the apologies were finished. Pay it, in full. Plus a 50% tip for the trouble you've caused. Trent pulled out his wallet with shaking hands. He threw several bills on the table, far more than necessary. Hunter and Spencer added their own contributions until there was a small pile of cash sitting among the dessert plates. Leave, Minho said simply. They left. All 3 of them practically ran for the exit, not looking back, not speaking to anyone. The restaurant door swung closed behind them with a soft chime that sounded almost cheerful. The silence stretched for another long moment. Then slowly, the restaurant came back to life, Conversations resumed in hushed whispers. Silverware clinked against plates. The piano player started up again, a soft melody that helped ease the tension. Kendra stood frozen in place, still holding her serving tray, still trying to process what had just happened. One moment she had been facing the worst night of her life. The next, a stranger had appeared and dismantled her tormentors with nothing more than a phone call and a few quiet words. Minho turned to face her. Up close, she could see that his dark eyes had softened slightly. The cold fury that had been there moments ago had faded into something warmer. Concern, perhaps, or admiration. "Are you all right?" he asked, and his voice was gentle now, nothing like the weapon it had been when addressing Trent. Kendra opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Her hands were shaking. Her eyes were burning. The adrenaline that had been keeping her upright was fading, leaving exhaustion and emotion in its wake. "I think you should sit down," Minho said. He guided her to his corner booth, his hand hovering near her elbow without quite touching her. Kendra sank onto the leather seat, her legs finally giving out beneath her. She pressed her palms against her eyes, fighting back the tears that threatened to fall. "Thank you," she managed finally. "I don't know why you did that, but thank you." Minho sat across from her, giving her space while still remaining close. "No one deserves to be treated that way," he said quietly. "Especially not you." The corner booth felt like a sanctuary, separated from the rest of the restaurant by an invisible barrier. Kendra sat across from Minho, her hands wrapped around a glass of water he had ordered for her. The ice clinked softly as her fingers trembled. She still couldn't fully comprehend what had happened. 20 minutes ago, she had been facing the worst night of her life. Now she was sitting across from a man who had dismantled 3 businessmen with nothing more than a phone call and quiet words. "Drink," Minho said gently. "You need it." Kendra obeyed, taking a long sip of the cold water. It helped clear her head, washing away some of the fog that had settled over her thoughts. She set the glass down and finally looked at him properly. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Concern, certainly. But there was something else underneath it, something warmer and more complicated. "I've seen you here before," she said, her voice steadier now. "You come in every Friday, corner booth, whiskey neat and the chef's special." A ghost of a smile crossed his features. "You remember my order." "I remember all my regulars' orders. It's part of the job." "Is it also part of the job to notice when someone is watching you?" Kendra felt heat rise to her cheeks. She had noticed him watching her, of course. It was hard not to notice someone like him, but she had assumed he was just another patron with wandering eyes, someone to be politely ignored rather than engaged with. "I noticed," she admitted. "I just didn't think much of it." "You should have," Minho said. "Noticing things can save your life, or at least save you from men like those 3. His words carried weight, a hint of the world he inhabited. Kendra realized she still knew almost nothing about him beyond his name and the obvious fact that he wielded significant power. The way Trent had reacted to his name suggested something she didn't want to think about too deeply. "Who are you?" she asked quietly. "Really?" Minho was silent for a long moment, considering her question. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. "I am a businessman. I have interests in various industries throughout the city: real estate, imports, consulting. Some of my business ventures are entirely legitimate. Others operate in grayer areas." "Grayer areas," Kendra repeated. "That's a diplomatic way of putting it." "I find diplomacy useful in most situations." She should have been afraid. Everything about this man suggested danger. The way people reacted to his name, the casual display of power she had just witnessed. But somehow, sitting across from him in the warm glow of the restaurant, she wasn't afraid. She felt safe, protected. For the first time in longer than she could remember, someone had stood up for her. Someone had seen her as a person worth defending. "Why did you help me?" she asked. "You don't know me. You had no reason to get involved." Minho leaned back in his seat, studying her with those dark, unreadable eyes. "I have been coming to this restaurant for 2 months," he said. "Every Friday I sit in this booth and I watch you work. I watch you handle difficult customers well. I watch you smile even when you are exhausted. I watch you treat everyone with respect, even those who offer none in return." He paused, something shifting in his expression. "You are remarkable, Kendra. You have strength that most people never develop in their entire lives. You have dignity that cannot be bought or broken. When I saw those men trying to take that from you, trying to force you to kneel, I could not remain silent." Kendra felt tears prick at her eyes again, not from sadness this time, but from something else entirely. When was the last time someone had seen her? Really seen her? Not as a server or a student or a struggling young woman barely keeping her head above water, but as a person with value. "You barely know me," she whispered. "I know enough," Minho replied simply. The restaurant continued to hum around them, patrons returning to their meals and conversations. But inside the bubble of the corner booth, time seemed to stand still. Kendra was acutely aware of every detail. The way the candlelight played across Minho's sharp features, the faint scent of his cologne, something woody and sophisticated, the intensity of his gaze focused entirely on her. "What happens now?" she asked. "That depends on you." Minho leaned forward slightly. "I have a proposition for you, if you are willing to hear it." Kendra's heart rate quickened. "What kind of proposition?" "I told you I have various business interests. One of them is a legal consulting firm. Entirely legitimate, I assure you. We handle contracts, negotiations, regulatory compliance. We work with major corporations and government entities." He paused, gauging her reaction before continuing. "We are always looking for talented people. People who are intelligent, hardworking, and possess integrity that cannot be compromised. People like you." Kendra stared at him, certain she had misheard. "Are you offering me a job?" "I am offering you an internship," Minho clarified. "Paid, of course. You would work in our legal department while completing your studies. You would learn from some of the best lawyers in the city, and when you graduate, if you have proven yourself, there would be a permanent position waiting for you." The offer hung in the air between them, glittering with possibility. Kendra's mind raced, trying to process what she was hearing. A paid internship, a chance to work in law, a field she had dreamed about before financial reality had pushed her toward more practical considerations. A way out of the endless cycle of double shifts and barely making rent. It was too good to be true. Things like this didn't happen to people like her. "Why?" she asked, the question coming out more harshly than she intended. "Why would you offer this to me? You could have anyone, people with connections, with degrees from prestigious schools. Why a waitress you've never even spoken to before tonight?" Minho didn't seem offended by her suspicion. If anything, he looked pleased by it. "Because those people with connections and prestigious degrees have never had to fight for anything in their lives," he said. "They have never known what it is to struggle, to sacrifice, to keep going when everything tells you to quit. You have. That kind of strength cannot be taught. It can only be forged through experience." He reached across the table, not quite touching her hand, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence. "I see something in you, Kendra. Something rare and valuable. I want to give you the opportunity to develop it. The rest is up to you." Kendra looked down at the table, her thoughts churning. Every instinct she had developed over years of struggle told her to be suspicious. Nobody gave something for nothing. There was always a catch, always a price to pay. But another part of her, the part that had stood tall and refused to kneel for Trent Whitmore, whispered something different. This was a chance, maybe the only chance she would ever get. Was she really going to let fear keep her trapped in a life of endless work and constant worry? She thought about her mother, scrubbing floors so Kendra could have opportunities she never had. She thought about the eviction notice on her kitchen counter, the organic chemistry exam she wasn't prepared for, the endless exhaustion that had become her constant companion. And she thought about who she wanted to be, not just who she was now, but who she could become if given the chance. "If I accept," she said slowly, "what would you expect from me?" "Only that you work hard and stay true to yourself," Minho replied. "I have no hidden motives, Kendra. I am not trying to buy you or control you. I simply believe you deserve better than this, and I am in a position to help make that happen." She searched his face for any sign of deception, any hint that his words were hollow. She found nothing but sincerity, and something that looked almost like hope. "I must be crazy," she murmured. "Perhaps," Minho agreed. "But sometimes crazy is exactly what the situation requires." Kendra took a deep breath, feeling as though she was standing on the edge of a cliff. One step forward would change everything. There would be no going back. "Okay," she said finally. "I accept." The words felt strange on her tongue, like speaking a foreign language, but they also felt right. For the first time in months, perhaps years, Kendra felt something that had been missing from her life: hope. Minho smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his severe features into something almost beautiful. "You will not regret this decision," he said. "I will make sure of it." He pulled out a business card and slid it across the table. The cardstock was thick, embossed with elegant script. "Park Minho, Chief Executive Officer, Horizon Legal Consulting. Report to this address on Monday morning," he said. 9 o'clock sharp. Ask for a woman named Mrs. Torres. She will handle your onboarding." Kendra took the card, running her fingers over the raised letters. It felt solid, tangible, proof that this was really happening. "What about my job here?" she asked suddenly, reality intruding on the moment. "You may continue working here if you wish, though I suspect you will not need to for much longer. The internship pays well." He stood, buttoning his jacket with practiced ease. Kendra scrambled to her feet as well, suddenly aware that she was still technically on the clock. "Mr. Park," she started. "Minho," he corrected gently. "Please." "Minho." The name felt strange and intimate on her lips. "I don't know how to thank you." "You already have," he replied, "by saying yes." He reached out and, for just a moment, his fingers brushed against hers. The touch was brief but electric, sending a jolt of awareness through her entire body. "Until Monday, Kendra," he said softly. And then he was gone, walking toward the exit with the same quiet confidence he had displayed all evening. Kendra watched him go, the business card clutched in her hand like a lifeline. The restaurant continued around her, oblivious to the fact that her entire world had just shifted on its axis. She stood in the middle of the dining room, a waitress in a borrowed uniform, holding a card that promised a future she had never dared to imagine. Monday morning, 9 o'clock sharp. Her new life was about to begin. Monday morning arrived faster than Kendra had anticipated. She stood outside the glass tower that housed Horizon Legal Consulting, her reflection staring back at her from the polished surface. The woman in the reflection looked nervous, uncertain, completely out of place among the suited professionals streaming through the revolving doors. Kendra had spent the entire weekend preparing for this moment. She had used the generous tips from Friday night to buy a modest suit jacket from a thrift store. She had pressed her nicest blouse until the collar was crisp and sharp. She had practiced introducing herself in the mirror until the words stopped catching in her throat. None of it felt like enough. The building towered 40 stories above the city streets. Kendra watched as men and women in suits strode past her, their shoes clicking against the marble steps, their eyes fixed on phones or colleagues, or some distant point that didn't include her. She didn't belong here. The thought repeated itself like a drumbeat in her mind. She was a waitress, a struggling student, a girl from Baltimore who had never set foot in a building like this except to serve food or clean floors. But then she remembered Friday night. She remembered standing tall when Trent had tried to force her to her knees. She remembered the look in Minho's eyes when he told her she was remarkable. She remembered the business card still tucked in her pocket, solid proof that someone believed she was capable of more. Kendra squared her shoulders and walked through the revolving doors. The lobby was impressive, soaring ceilings, polished floors, a massive reception desk staffed by people in matching uniforms. She approached the reception desk, her heart pounding against her ribs. "Good morning," she said, willing her voice not to shake. "My name is Kendra Lawson. I'm here to see Mrs. Torres. Mr. Park arranged for me to start an internship today." The receptionist, a young woman with flawless makeup and perfectly styled hair, looked up from her computer. Her eyes traveled over Kendra's thrift store jacket and sensible flats with barely concealed judgment. "One moment, please," she said, her tone professionally neutral. She typed something into her computer, and Kendra watched her expression shift from skepticism to surprise to something approaching respect. "Of course, Ms. Lawson. Mrs. Torres is expecting you. Take the elevator to the 32nd floor. Her office is the third door on the right." "Thank you," Kendra managed, relief flooding through her. The elevator ride was smooth and silent, the numbers climbing rapidly on the digital display. Kendra used the time to steady her breathing and collect her thoughts. Whatever happened next, she would face it with the same dignity she had shown on Friday night. She would not let anyone make her feel small. The 32nd floor was quieter than the lobby, all muted colors and soft carpeting. Kendra counted doors until she reached the third one on the right. A brass nameplate read, "Mrs. Elena Torres, Director of Human Resources." She knocked twice and waited. "Come in," called a voice from inside. Kendra opened the door and stepped into an office that was smaller than she expected but impeccably organized. Every surface was neat and orderly, files arranged in precise stacks, pens lined up like soldiers. Behind the desk sat a woman in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair and sharp eyes behind elegant glasses. Mrs. Torres looked up from her paperwork and smiled warmly. "You must be Kendra," she said, rising to shake her hand. "Mr. Park told me to expect you. Please have a seat." Kendra sat in the chair across from the desk. Her hands folded neatly in her lap. Mrs. Torres studied her for a moment, her expression thoughtful but not unkind. "I understand you're a college student," Mrs. Torres said. "What are you studying?" "Pre-med," Kendra replied. "I'm in my second year. Organic chemistry, biology, that sort of thing." "Impressive. And now you're interested in law?" Kendra hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "I've always been interested in law, actually. I considered it before I started college, but the path seemed impractical. Medical school felt more achievable given my circumstances." Mrs. Torres nodded, something knowing in her expression. "Mr. Park mentioned that you're a hard worker, that you balance a full course load with a demanding job, that you handle pressure well." "I try," Kendra said simply. "Trying is good, succeeding is better." Mrs. Torres pulled a folder from her desk and opened it. "Here's what I need you to understand, Kendra. This internship is a real opportunity, but it's not a gift. You will be expected to work harder than you've ever worked before. You will be challenged, pushed, and occasionally overwhelmed. Many people in your position would give up." She looked up from the folder, her eyes meeting Kendra's directly. "Mr. Park seems to believe you are not like many people. I hope he's right." "So do I," Kendra said honestly. That earned her another smile from Mrs. Torres. "Good answer. Let me show you to your desk." The legal department occupied the entire 34th floor. Kendra followed Mrs. Torres through a maze of cubicles and glass-walled offices, trying to absorb everything she was seeing. Lawyers in suits debated cases in conference rooms. Paralegals hurried past with stacks of documents. The air hummed with purpose and productivity. Her desk was small but functional, tucked into a corner near the windows. Someone had already set up her computer and stocked the drawers with supplies. A small plant sat on the corner, its leaves bright green against the gray office furniture. "You'll be working primarily with Mr. Davidson," Mrs. Torres explained. "He handles contract law. You'll assist with research, document preparation, and client communications. Nothing glamorous, but essential work." "I'm not afraid of unglamorous work," Kendra said. "I had a feeling you weren't." Mrs. Torres handed her a thick binder. "This is your training manual. Read it cover to cover by end of day Wednesday. Thursday, you start real work. Any questions?" Kendra had about 1,000 questions, but she simply shook her head. "Not right now." "Good. Welcome to Horizon Legal, Kendra. Don't make me regret this." She walked away, leaving Kendra alone at her new desk, with a binder the size of a small encyclopedia and a plant that seemed to be judging her. Kendra sat down, opened the binder, and started reading. The first week was brutal. Kendra quickly learned that Mrs. Torres had not been exaggerating about the workload. She spent 12 hours a day at the office, learning legal terminology and document formatting and the intricate hierarchy of the firm. At night, she went home and studied for her organic chemistry exam. She slept 4 hours if she was lucky and survived on coffee and determination. But she did not quit. She did not complain. She did not give anyone a reason to doubt Minho's faith in her. By the second week, she had memorized the training manual and impressed Mr. Davidson with her attention to detail. By the third week, she was handling simple research assignments independently. By the fourth week, senior lawyers were requesting her assistance on complex cases. The other interns watched her with a mixture of curiosity and resentment. Most of them came from privileged backgrounds, with wealthy parents and prestigious schools and connections that guaranteed them success. They couldn't understand why someone like Kendra, a nobody from nowhere, was advancing so quickly. Kendra didn't care what they thought. She had spent her whole life being underestimated. She knew how to use that to her advantage. The real surprise came at the end of her first month, when Minho appeared at her desk. She hadn't seen him since that Friday night at La Maison Dorée. She knew he was the CEO of the company, knew he had offices on the top floor, but he rarely descended to the lower levels where the regular employees worked. His presence now caused a ripple of whispers and startled looks throughout the department. "Mr. Park," she said, standing quickly from her chair. "Minho," he corrected, just as he had that night in the restaurant. "How are you settling in?" "Well, I think everyone has been very helpful." He glanced around the office, taking in the stacks of files on her desk, the notes scribbled on her legal pad, the empty coffee cups waiting to be discarded. "You've been working hard," he observed. "You told me to prove myself. I'm trying to do that." Something warm flickered in his dark eyes. "You're succeeding." He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope which he placed on her desk. "Your first paycheck," he explained. "I wanted to deliver it personally." Kendra picked up the envelope, feeling the weight of it in her hands. She opened it and looked at the number printed on the check inside. Her breath caught in her throat. It was more money than she had made in 3 months at La Maison Dorée. More than enough to cover her back rent, with plenty left over for groceries and textbooks, and maybe even some new clothes that didn't come from thrift stores. "This can't be right," she whispered. "It's exactly right," Minho said. "You've earned every penny." She looked up at him, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. Not from sadness this time, but from something else entirely. Relief, gratitude. The overwhelming sensation of possibility opening up before her. "Thank you," she said, "for all of this, for believing in me when no one else did." Minho smiled, that rare, genuine expression that transformed his severe features. "Thank yourself, Kendra. I gave you an opportunity. You're the one who seized it." He turned to leave, then paused at the edge of her cubicle. "Keep working hard," he said softly. "The best is yet to come." 6 months had passed since Kendra first walked through the doors of Horizon Legal Consulting. 6 months of late nights and early mornings. 6 months of learning and growing and transforming into someone she barely recognized when she looked in the mirror. The woman staring back at her now was different from the exhausted waitress who had stood in La Maison Dorée, fighting back tears as three men tried to break her spirit. This woman wore tailored jackets that actually fit. This woman carried herself with quiet confidence. This woman had earned the respect of colleagues who had initially dismissed her as a charity case. Kendra adjusted the collar of her silk blouse and gathered her files for the morning meeting. Today was important. Today, for the first time, she would be presenting her own research to the senior partners. The conference room on the 38th floor was already filling up when she arrived. Senior lawyers in suits took their seats around the massive oak table, their conversations a low hum of legal jargon and office politics. Kendra found a spot near the window and arranged her materials with steady hands. She was nervous, but not afraid. There was a difference. Mr. Davidson, her direct supervisor, caught her eye from across the room and gave her an encouraging nod. He had become something of an ally over the past months, recognizing her potential and advocating for her advancement. But even his support couldn't calm the butterflies in her stomach as the clock ticked toward the start of the meeting. The room fell silent when Minho entered. He moved with that same quiet authority she had witnessed on their first real encounter, his presence commanding attention without demanding it. His dark suit was immaculate, his expression composed and unreadable. He took his seat at the head of the table and surveyed the room with those penetrating eyes. When his gaze found Kendra, something flickered there. Pride, perhaps, or anticipation. It was gone before she could identify it, replaced by the professional mask he wore in these settings. "Let's begin," he said simply. The meeting progressed through the usual agenda items: quarterly reports, pending cases, new client acquisitions. Kendra listened attentively, taking notes and absorbing information that would have been incomprehensible to her 6 months ago. Now she understood the language, the strategies, the subtle power plays that occurred beneath the surface of every discussion. Finally, Mr. Davidson cleared his throat. "Before we adjourn, I'd like to introduce a new initiative that Ms. Lawson has been developing. It's a pro bono program targeting low-income workers who face discrimination or exploitation in the workplace. I think you'll find her proposal quite compelling." All eyes turned to Kendra. She stood, her files clutched against her chest, and walked to the presentation screen at the front of the room. "Thank you, Mr. Davidson," she said, her voice clear and steady. "As many of you know, I came to Horizon from a service industry background. I've witnessed firsthand how vulnerable workers can be to mistreatment by employers and clients who believe they are above consequences." She clicked to the first slide, a series of statistics that she had spent weeks compiling. In our city alone, over 40% of restaurant workers report experiencing harassment or discrimination. 70% say they have been denied wages or tips at some point in their careers, and fewer than 10% ever pursue legal action, primarily because they cannot afford representation. She moved through her presentation with growing confidence, outlining the program she had designed. Pro bono legal services for workers who had been exploited. Partnerships with community organizations to identify those in need. Training programs to educate vulnerable populations about their rights. When she finished, the room was silent for a long moment. Kendra felt her confidence waver. Had she overstepped? Had she misjudged the room's appetite for this kind of initiative? Then Minho spoke. "Ms. Lawson, what inspired this particular focus?" She met his eyes, seeing the subtle encouragement hidden beneath his neutral expression. "Personal experience, sir. I've been that worker. I've faced those situations. And I've seen how powerless it can make you feel when you believe no one is on your side." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "I was fortunate enough to find someone who was willing to help me. I want to create a system where others don't have to rely on fortune." Another silence. Then, one by one, the senior partners began to nod. Mr. Davidson was smiling openly. Even the most skeptical faces had softened into something approaching approval. I think we can move forward with a pilot program, Minho said finally. Ms. Lawson, I'd like you to lead it. Report directly to me with weekly updates on your progress. Kendra felt her heart skip. Yes, sir. Thank you. The meeting adjourned, and the partners filed out with murmured conversations. Kendra gathered her materials, still processing what had just happened. She had proposed something bold, something personal, and they had said yes. More than that, Minho had put her in charge. She was so absorbed in her thoughts that she didn't notice him approaching until he was standing right beside her. Walk with me, Minho said quietly. She followed him out of the conference room and down a corridor she had never entered before. It led to a private elevator that required a key card to operate. Minho swiped his card and the doors opened with a soft chime. The elevator rose swiftly to the 40th floor, the executive level. When the doors opened, Kendra found herself in a space that was equal parts office and art gallery. Large windows offered panoramic views of the city. Original paintings hung on walls covered in rich fabric. The furniture was minimalist, each piece chosen with careful intention. Minho's private office. He walked to the windows and stood looking out at the skyline, his hands clasped behind his back. You impressed them today, he said without turning around. Several of those partners have been with the firm for decades. They don't impress easily. I just spoke about what I know, Kendra replied, still standing near the elevator. That's exactly what made it powerful. He turned to face her, his expression softer than she had ever seen it in a professional setting. Come, sit. She crossed the room and took a seat in one of the leather chairs facing his desk. Minho sat across from her, and for a moment, they simply looked at each other. Do you know why I brought you here, Kendra? Not to this office, to this company. You said you saw something in me, she answered carefully. I did. I do. He leaned forward, his dark eyes intense. But it's more than that. When I watched you in that restaurant, I saw someone who reminded me of myself. Someone who had been underestimated their entire life. Someone who had been told in 1,000 small ways that they didn't belong in rooms like this one. Kendra felt her breath catch. She had wondered about his background, about how a Korean man had risen to control one of the most powerful organizations on the East Coast. He had never spoken about it directly. I came to this country when I was 17, Minho continued. No money, no connections, no understanding of how the world worked here. Everything I have, I built from nothing. And I built it because someone, at a crucial moment, decided to give me a chance. Who? Kendra asked softly. A man who saw what I could become, not what I was. A ghost of a smile crossed his features. He's gone now. But I made a promise to him before he died. I promised that when I found someone with the same fire, the same potential, I would do for them what he did for me. Understanding dawned slowly in Kendra's mind. This wasn't just about business. This wasn't just about filling a position or developing an employee. This was something deeper, more personal. I don't know what to say, she admitted. You don't have to say anything. Just keep doing what you're doing. Keep learning. Keep growing. Keep becoming the person you were meant to be. He stood and walked to a cabinet near the wall. From inside, he retrieved a small box wrapped in elegant paper. I have something for you, he said, placing the box in her hands. Kendra unwrapped it carefully, revealing a leather case inside. She opened the case and gasped softly. It was a pen. But not just any pen. A Mont Blanc, sleek and elegant, with her initials engraved on the cap in delicate gold script. K.L. Kendra Lawson. Every great lawyer needs a great pen, Minho said. Consider it a symbol of the contract we've made. Not a legal contract, a personal one. My faith in you in exchange for your dedication to becoming exceptional. Kendra ran her fingers over the smooth surface of the pen, feeling the weight of it in her hands. It was beautiful, thoughtful. But more than that, it was a statement, a declaration that someone believed in her future. I won't let you down, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I know you won't. Minho returned to his seat, the moment of intimacy passing. Now, let's discuss the logistics of your new program. I have some contacts in the service industry who might be valuable resources. They spent the next 2 hours mapping out strategies and connections. Minho shared insights from his years of building influence, teaching her how to navigate the complex web of politics and power that surrounded every significant initiative. He was patient but demanding, expecting her to think critically and challenge assumptions. By the time Kendra left his office, the sun was setting over the city, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. She stood at the elevator, the pen box clutched against her chest, and looked back at the man silhouetted against the window. He had given her more than a job, more than a chance. He had given her a vision of who she could become, and she was determined to prove worthy of that vision. 1 year had passed since the night at La Maison Dorée that changed everything. Kendra stood in her new apartment, a modest but comfortable one-bedroom in a safe neighborhood, and marveled at how different her life had become. Gone was the constant anxiety about making rent. Gone were the double shifts that left her too exhausted to study. Gone was the feeling that she was drowning, barely keeping her head above water as wave after wave of hardship crashed over her. In its place was something she had never dared to imagine: stability, purpose, hope. She adjusted her suit jacket and reviewed her notes for the day ahead. The pro bono program she had launched 6 months ago was expanding rapidly. What had started as a pilot initiative serving a handful of clients had grown into a full department with 3 staff attorneys and a dozen volunteer lawyers from the firm. Today, she was meeting with the mayor's office to discuss city funding for the program. The same Kendra who had once served water to politicians at La Maison Dorée would now be sitting across from them as an equal, negotiating for resources that would help hundreds of vulnerable workers. Her phone chimed with a text message. Mrs. Torres. Car is waiting downstairs. Mr. Park will meet you at City Hall. Kendra grabbed her briefcase, the leather one Minho had given her after her first successful case, and headed for the door. As she passed the mirror in her hallway, she caught a glimpse of herself and paused. The woman looking back at her was almost unrecognizable from a year ago. Her skin still held that rich mahogany glow, but it was healthier now, nourished by regular meals and adequate sleep. Her eyes, while still carrying that touch of melancholy that seemed permanently etched into her features, also held confidence and determination. But the biggest change wasn't physical. It was in the way she carried herself, head high, shoulders back, moving through the world like she belonged in it. The car was indeed waiting, a sleek black sedan with a driver who nodded respectfully as she approached. Good morning, Ms. Lawson, City Hall? Yes, thank you, James. She had protested the car service at first, insisting she could take the subway like everyone else. But Minho had been firm on this point. You represent Horizon Legal now, he had said. How you present yourself reflects on the entire firm. The drive through the city gave her time to review her presentation one final time. She had spent weeks preparing for this meeting, gathering data, building arguments, anticipating objections. The mayor's chief of staff, a sharp woman named Patricia Wong, was known for being skeptical of private-public partnerships. Kendra would need to be at her absolute best to win her over. City Hall loomed before them, its neoclassical architecture a testament to governmental authority. Kendra had been inside only once before, years ago, as part of a college tour. She had felt small then, overwhelmed by the grandeur and formality of the space. She didn't feel small anymore. Minho was waiting in the lobby, immaculate as always in a dark gray suit that emphasized his lean frame. When he saw her, something warm flickered in his usually composed expression. You look ready, he said by way of greeting. I am ready, Kendra replied with more confidence than she felt. Good. Remember, they need this program as much as we want to provide it. The mayor is facing re-election. Being seen as a champion for workers' rights would boost his numbers significantly. They rode the elevator to the 5th floor, where the mayor's conference room overlooked the city square. Patricia Wong was already there, along with 2 other staffers and the deputy mayor. They all stood as Minho and Kendra entered. "Mr. Park," Patricia said, extending her hand. "Thank you for coming." "The pleasure is ours," Minho replied smoothly. "May I introduce Kendra Lawson, the architect and director of our Workers' Justice Initiative." Kendra shook hands with each official, noting the way their eyes assessed her. She was younger than they expected, she could tell, and certainly not what they had imagined when they heard about a former waitress turned legal advocate. "Shall we begin?" Patricia said, gesturing to the conference table. Kendra opened her briefcase and pulled out her materials, arranging them with practiced efficiency. Then she stood and walked to the presentation screen with the same confidence she had developed over months of practice. "Thank you for your time today," she began. "I'd like to start with a story. 6 months ago, Maria Gonzalez came to our office. She's a single mother of 3 who works as a hotel housekeeper. Her employer had been shorting her pay for months, claiming she was taking longer breaks than allowed. When she complained, they threatened to fire her and report her to immigration, even though she's a legal resident." She clicked to the first slide, showing Maria's picture alongside her 3 children. Maria had given up hope of ever seeing that money. She couldn't afford a lawyer. She couldn't risk losing her job. She was trapped in a system designed to keep workers like her powerless. Another click, showing the resolution of the case. "Through our program, we not only recovered her stolen wages with interest, but we also uncovered a pattern of similar abuse affecting over 200 employees at the same hotel chain. The resulting settlement provided relief for all of them and forced the company to implement new policies protecting workers' rights." Patricia leaned forward, her interest clearly piqued. "How many cases like this have you handled?" "In 6 months, we've taken on 87 cases," Kendra replied. "We've recovered over $3 million in stolen wages and damages, but more importantly, we've sent a message to employers across the city that exploitation will no longer be tolerated." She moved through her presentation, outlining the program's successes, its methodology, and its potential for expansion with city support. She spoke about the dignity of work, the importance of protecting vulnerable populations, and the economic benefits of ensuring fair labor practices. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then Patricia spoke. "This is impressive work, Ms. Lawson, but I have to ask, what's in it for Horizon Legal? Pro bono work doesn't generate profit." Before Kendra could respond, Minho spoke. "Sometimes profit isn't measured in dollars," he said quietly. "Sometimes it's measured in the knowledge that you've made your city a better place to live, that you've helped create a system where hard work is rewarded fairly, where people like Ms. Lawson don't have to endure humiliation and exploitation just to survive." His words carried weight, and Kendra saw the officials exchange glances. They knew Minho's reputation, knew the power he wielded. When a man like him spoke about justice and fairness, people listened. "What exactly are you asking for?" the deputy mayor asked. Kendra pulled out her final document. "We're proposing a partnership. The city provides funding for 5 additional staff attorneys and operational costs. In exchange, we commit to handling at least 200 cases per year, with priority given to workers in city-contracted businesses. We'll also provide quarterly reports on labor violations, helping the city identify problem employers before situations escalate." Patricia took the document and began reading through it carefully. The room was silent except for the rustling of pages. "This is ambitious," she said finally. "The funding request alone is significant." "The cost of doing nothing is higher," Kendra replied. "Every worker who gets cheated out of wages is a family that might end up needing city services. Every employer who gets away with exploitation becomes emboldened to do worse. We're not asking for charity, we're offering an investment in the city's workforce." Patricia looked at her colleagues, some silent communication passing between them. Then she turned back to Kendra. "We'll need to review this with the mayor and the city council. But I can tell you that I'm impressed. Both with the program and with you, Ms. Lawson. She paused. I heard about what happened to you at La Maison Dorée. The whole city heard about it. To see you here now, advocating for others who face similar treatment, it's quite remarkable. Kendra felt heat rise to her cheeks. The incident at the restaurant had become something of an urban legend, spreading through service industry workers across the city. She hadn't realized it had reached the mayor's office. Thank you, she said simply. I was fortunate to find someone who believed I was worth defending. I want to be that person for others. The meeting concluded with handshakes and promises of follow-up. As they walked back to the elevator, Minho placed a hand lightly on Kendra's shoulder. You were excellent, he said. Prepared, passionate, but not emotional. You've learned to speak their language while maintaining your authenticity. I had a good teacher, Kendra replied. Something passed between them in that moment, a connection that went beyond mentor and student. Over the past year, their relationship had evolved into something more complex. Not romantic exactly, but intimate in its own way. Minho had become her guide, her protector, her champion. And she had become, she suspected, something equally important to him. The elevator doors opened and they stepped inside. As the floors counted down, Minho spoke again. There's something else I want to discuss with you, not here. Over dinner, perhaps? Kendra looked at him, surprised. In all their interactions, they had never shared a meal outside of work functions. Dinner? She repeated. There's a small Korean restaurant I know. Quiet, discreet. We could discuss your future without interruption. Her future. The words sent a small thrill through her. Every conversation with Minho about her future had resulted in dramatic changes to her life. Okay, she said. When? Tonight, if you're free. 8 o'clock. The elevator reached the lobby, and they walked toward their separate cars. Before getting in, Minho turned back to her. Kendra? Wear something nice. Not business attire. This is different. He was in his car and gone before she could ask what he meant by different. She stood on the sidewalk, watching his sedan disappear into traffic, wondering what new transformation awaited her. That evening, Kendra stood before her closet, paralyzed by indecision. She had acquired several nice dresses over the past months, but choosing one for tonight felt impossibly important. This wasn't a business dinner. Minho had made that clear. But what was it exactly? She finally settled on a deep wine-colored dress that complemented her skin tone perfectly. It was elegant without being flashy, sophisticated without being severe. She paired it with simple jewelry and low heels, styling her hair in soft waves that framed her face. Looking in the mirror, she saw a woman she was still learning to recognize. Beautiful, confident, worthy of sitting across from a man like Minho, not as a charity case or employee, but as an equal. The restaurant was in Koreatown, tucked between a bookstore and a tea shop. From the outside it looked unremarkable, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. But inside, it was warm and intimate, with dark wood furnishings and soft lighting that created an atmosphere of privacy. Minho was already there, seated at a corner table. He stood when she entered, and she saw his eyes widen slightly as he took in her appearance. You look beautiful, he said simply. Thank you, she replied, feeling warmth spread through her chest. They sat, and a server appeared with tea and small dishes of Korean appetizers. Minho ordered for them both in Korean, his voice taking on a different cadence in his native language. This place reminds me of home, he said when the server left. The owner is from the same neighborhood where I grew up in Seoul. You don't talk about home much, Kendra observed. There's not much to tell. Poor family, difficult circumstances, a young man's decision to seek opportunity elsewhere. He paused, his dark eyes distant. I haven't been back in 15 years. Do you miss it? Sometimes, but the Korea I left doesn't exist anymore. The country has changed. I've changed. We're strangers to each other now. There was sadness in his voice, a vulnerability she had never heard before. Without thinking, She reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "I understand," she said, leaving things behind to become someone new. He turned his hand palm up, interlacing their fingers. The touch sent electricity through her entire body. "That's what I wanted to talk to you about," he said. "You're approaching a crossroads, Kendra. You'll graduate next year. The city will likely approve funding for the program. You could continue as you are, running the initiative, helping people, making a comfortable living." "But," she prompted, "but you're capable of so much more. I want to offer you something. Full sponsorship for law school. Any school you can get into. Harvard, Yale, Columbia. I'll cover everything. Tuition, living expenses, whatever you need." Kendra stared at him, speechless. Law school had been a dream she had abandoned as impossibly expensive. Now he was offering to make it reality. "Why?" she whispered. "Because you're exceptional. Because you've already proven you can change lives. Because with the right education and opportunities, you could change the world." The main courses arrived, giving her a moment to process his offer. They ate in comfortable silence, the Korean barbecue tender and flavorful. But Kendra barely tasted it. Her mind was spinning with possibilities. "There's something else," Minho said eventually. She looked up, meeting his eyes. "I care about you, Kendra, more than I should. More than is appropriate given our professional relationship." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I'm not asking for anything. I'm not making the law school offer contingent on anything. But I wanted you to know. You deserve to know." Kendra felt her heart racing. She had sensed something between them, something that went beyond mentor and protege. But hearing him say it aloud made it real in a way she hadn't expected. "Minho," she started, but he held up a hand. "You don't have to respond. Not now. Take the law school offer. Build your career. Become who you're meant to be." He smiled, that rare, genuine expression that transformed his features. "And then, when you're ready, we can talk about what else might be possible." They finished their meal with lighter conversation, discussing cases and colleagues and the small details of daily life. But underneath it all, something had shifted. A door had been opened that could never be fully closed. When Minho walked her to her car at the end of the evening, he paused before opening her door. "Whatever you decide about law school, about us, about anything," he said quietly, "know that I will always be in your corner. That will never change." He leaned in and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. It was tender, almost reverent. Nothing like what she might have expected from a man of his reputation. "Good night, Kendra," he said. "Think about what I said." She drove home in a daze, her mind full of possibilities she had never dared to imagine. 3 years later, Kendra Lawson sat in her corner office at Horizon Legal Consulting, reviewing contracts for a major acquisition. The office was everything she had once dreamed of: expansive windows overlooking the city, custom furniture, original artwork on the walls. Her law degree from Columbia hung beside her undergraduate diploma, both framed simply. She had graduated summa cum laude, first in her class, with offers from every major firm in the city. But she had returned to Horizon, to the place where her transformation began, to the man who had made it all possible. Minho had been right about law school. With proper education and credentials, she had become unstoppable. Her workers' rights initiative had expanded into a nationwide program, earning recognition from the Department of Labor and spawning imitators across the country. She had argued cases before state supreme courts, negotiated settlements worth hundreds of millions, and built a reputation as one of the fiercest advocates in corporate law. But more than that, she had found her voice. The quiet waitress who had once absorbed abuse in silence was gone. In her place stood a woman who commanded respect the moment she walked into a room. Her assistant knocked on the door. "Ms. Lawson, your 2 o'clock is here." "Send them in, Sarah." Kendra didn't look up from her contracts immediately. She had learned the power of making people wait. of establishing dominance through small gestures. It was a lesson Minho had taught her, one of many that had shaped her into who she was now. When she finally raised her eyes, she froze. Standing in her doorway, looking diminished and desperate, was Trent Whitmore III. He was older now, of course. They both were. But while the years had refined Kendra, they had ravaged Trent. His once perfectly styled hair was thinning and unkempt. His suit couldn't hide the soft belly of too many business lunches and too much whiskey. His blue eyes, once sharp with arrogance, were bloodshot and hollow. "Hello, Kendra," he said, his voice lacking any of its former command. She leaned back in her chair, studying him with the same clinical detachment he had once directed at her. "Mr. Whitmore," she said coolly. "I wasn't expecting you. My calendar shows a meeting with Whitmore Development, but I assumed they would send their legal team." "I am the legal team," Trent said with a bitter laugh. "Or what's left of it. May I sit?" Kendra gestured to one of the chairs facing her desk. She watched him sink into it, noting how his shoulders slumped, how his hands trembled slightly as he placed his briefcase on the floor. "I suppose you're wondering why I'm here," he said. "I assume it has something to do with your company's impending bankruptcy filing," Kendra replied. "The business news has been quite detailed about Whitmore Development's troubles: over-leveraged assets, failed projects, SEC investigations into fraudulent accounting practices." Trent flinched at each point, as if she were striking him physically. "You've done your homework." "I do my homework on all potential clients. The question is whether Horizon Legal wants to take on a client with your particular challenges." The irony of the moment was not lost on either of them. 3 years ago, Trent had tried to force her to kneel at his feet. Now he sat before her, essentially begging for her help. "My father is dead," Trent said suddenly. "Heart attack 6 months ago. The stress of the investigations killed him. He left me in charge of a sinking ship." "I heard about his passing," Kendra said, her tone neutral. "My condolences. He never recovered from that phone call, you know, the one your friend made that night." Trent's jaw clenched. "Minho destroyed my father with a single conversation, made him question everything about how he'd raised me, how he'd run his business. He started making mistakes, bad investments, trying to prove he was still powerful. It all started that night." Kendra felt no sympathy. She thought of all the workers Whitmore Development had cheated over the years, all the contractors left unpaid, all the communities destroyed for profit. "Your father's choices were his own," she said, "as were yours that night." Trent looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw recognition dawn in his eyes. This wasn't the same woman he had tormented. This was someone else entirely, someone powerful, someone dangerous. "You've changed," he said quietly. "Yes," Kendra agreed. "I have." She stood and walked to her window, looking out at the city spread below. From this height, the restaurant where she had once worked was visible, a small building among giants. "Do you know what I learned that night, Mr. Whitmore? I learned that there are 2 types of power in this world. There's the power that comes from inherited privilege, the kind you wielded so carelessly. And there's the power that comes from struggle, from building something from nothing, from knowing exactly what you're capable of because you've been tested in ways others can't imagine." She turned to face him, silhouetted against the afternoon sun. "You had the first kind, I have the second. Which do you think is stronger?" Trent didn't answer. He couldn't. The answer was sitting right in front of him. "What would it take?" he asked finally. "To get Horizon to represent Whitmore Development?" Kendra returned to her desk and pulled out a file she had prepared for this meeting. She had known he would come eventually. Desperate people always did. "First, we would need a complete audit of all assets and liabilities. No hidden accounts, no offshore shells, complete transparency." "Done," Trent said quickly. "Second, we would restructure the entire company. The Whitmore family would retain no controlling interest. You would step down as CEO immediately. Trent's face went pale. That company has been in my family for 3 generations. And in 3 generations, it's destroyed hundreds of lives through predatory practices and exploitation. If you want to save anything from the wreckage, you'll accept our terms. She slid a document across the desk. Third, 30% of any recovered assets will go to a fund for workers who were cheated by Whitmore Development over the years. Non-negotiable. Trent picked up the document with shaking hands. As he read through it, his face cycled through emotions: anger, despair, and finally, resignation. This isn't legal representation, he said. This is a takeover. This is justice, Kendra corrected. Something you once told me I didn't understand. But I understand it perfectly now. Justice isn't just about law, it's about balance. It's about ensuring that those who cause harm face consequences. She leaned forward, her eyes never leaving his face. You have 24 hours to decide. Accept our terms, and we'll salvage what we can of your company. Refuse, and you can watch it burn to the ground. Either way, the Whitmore empire as you knew it is over. Trent stood abruptly, his face flushed with the kind of impotent rage she remembered from that night at the restaurant. For a moment, she thought he might say something, might try to reclaim some shred of his former arrogance. But then his shoulders sagged and he looked every inch the broken man he had become. You enjoy this, he said quietly, having me at your mercy. Kendra considered his words carefully before responding. No, she said finally. I don't enjoy it. But I don't pity you either. You're experiencing what thousands of people have experienced because of men like you. The only difference is that you have the option of accepting help. Many of your victims never had that choice. Trent picked up his briefcase and walked to the door. He paused at the threshold, looking back at her. I was wrong that night, he said. When I called you nobody, you were never nobody. I just couldn't see it. You couldn't see it because you never really looked, Kendra replied. You saw a servant, not a person. That blindness cost you everything. After he left, Kendra sat in silence for several minutes. She had imagined this moment many times over the years, had wondered how it would feel to have Trent Whitmore at her mercy. She had expected satisfaction, perhaps even joy. Instead, she felt nothing. No triumph, no vindication, just a sense of completion, like closing a chapter in a book she no longer needed to read. Her phone vibrated with a text from Minho. Heard you had an interesting visitor. She smiled despite herself. Even after 3 years, his intelligence network never ceased to amaze her. Come to my office, she texted back. You'll want to hear this. Minutes later, Minho appeared in her doorway. He moved with the same quiet grace that had first caught her attention, though she now knew the precision that lurked beneath that calm exterior. Their relationship had evolved over the years into something complex and undefined, not quite romantic, but far more than professional. They existed in a space between definitions, bound by shared understanding and mutual respect. So, he said, settling into the chair Trent had vacated. How did it feel? Different than I expected, Kendra admitted. Less satisfying. He's already broken. Destroying him further seems pointless. But you'll do it anyway. The company needs to be dismantled. Too many crimes hidden in its foundation. But I'll make sure some value is preserved. The employees who had nothing to do with the family's crimes shouldn't suffer. Minho studied her with those dark eyes that still made her heart race after all these years. You've become quite formidable, Kendra Lawson. I had a good teacher. You surpassed the teacher long ago. They sat in comfortable silence. 2 people who had risen from nothing to command empires, who understood each other in ways that required no words. He'll accept the terms, Kendra said eventually. He has no choice. Of course he will. You've left him no other option, just as he left you no option that night. The difference is that I'm offering him a way forward. Diminished, certainly, but still breathing. He offered me humiliation or destruction. That's because you're better than him, Minho said simply. You always were. It just took some time for the world to recognize it. A knock at the door interrupted them. Sarah entered with a stack of files. Ms. Lawson, the Patterson case documents you requested. Also, Channel 7 called again about an interview regarding the Workers' Justice Initiative anniversary. Schedule the interview for next week, Kendra said, accepting the files. And Sarah, please have the acquisition team prepare for a new client. Whitmore Development will be signing with us tomorrow. Sarah's eyes widened slightly, but she maintained her professional composure. Of course, Ms. Lawson. After she left, Minho stood to leave as well. Dinner tonight? He asked, as he had every Friday for the past 3 years. Always, she replied, as she always did. At the door he paused and looked back at her. Your mother would be proud of who you've become. Kendra felt tears prick at her eyes. She had brought her mother to New York last year, set her up in a beautiful apartment where she no longer had to clean other people's homes. Diane Lawson had cried when she saw her daughter's office, had touched every surface with wonder and disbelief. She is proud, Kendra said. She tells me every day. Good. You deserve to hear it. After he left, Kendra returned to her contracts, but her mind wandered to that night 3 years ago when everything changed. She thought about the woman she had been, frightened and desperate, standing her ground against impossible odds. She thought about the man who had emerged from shadows to defend her, who had seen something in her worth saving. And she thought about tomorrow, when Trent Whitmore would return to sign his surrender. The boy who had tried to break her would kneel, metaphorically if not literally, and accept her terms. The poetry of it should have been satisfying. But Kendra had learned that true power wasn't about making others kneel. It was about lifting others up, as Minho had lifted her. It was about creating systems where people like her past self could find justice without needing a savior. That was the real victory. Not Trent's defeat, but her own transformation. Not the destruction of enemies, but the construction of something better. She picked up her pen, the Mont Blanc that Minho had given her so long ago, and returned to her work. There would be time for reflection later. For now, there were contracts to review, cases to build, and justice to pursue. The woman who had once served tables at La Maison Dorée was gone. In her place sat Kendra Lawson, attorney at law, advocate for the voiceless, and living proof that power could be earned rather than inherited. And she was just getting started. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters and camera crews, their lights creating a carnival atmosphere in front of the marble columns that represented justice. Kendra stood at the center of it all, flanked by her legal team, wearing a tailored navy suit. Behind her stood the clients whose lives hung in the balance, former employees of Whitmore Development, construction workers who had gone unpaid for months, contractors whose businesses had collapsed when the company refused to honor contracts. Maria Gonzalez, the hotel housekeeper whose case had launched Kendra's career, stood nearby with her 3 children, now teenagers, watching with pride. The Whitmore Development bankruptcy proceedings had consumed the better part of a year. Kendra had led the charge, uncovering layers of fraud and corruption that made the initial crimes seem almost quaint. Hidden accounts, bribes to city officials, falsified documents. The scope of the wrongdoing was breathtaking, and at the center of it all was Trent Whitmore. He had accepted Horizon's terms immediately after their meeting. The alternative was prison, and even a man broken by circumstance preferred financial ruin to incarceration. But the investigation had revealed far worse crimes than simple non-payment of workers. The SEC had gotten involved. The FBI had opened a formal investigation. Criminal charges were being prepared. Today, the bankruptcy court would rule on the liquidation of Whitmore Development's assets. The company would cease to exist, absorbed entirely into receivership. Any remaining value would be distributed according to Kendra's restructured plan. 50% to creditors, 30% to the Workers' Compensation Fund, and 20% to various community organizations she had selected. Trent's family would lose everything. The name that had carried weight in the city for 3 generations would become synonymous with corruption and fraud. Kendra stepped up to the microphone, and the crowd fell silent. 3 years ago, I was working as a server at a restaurant when I was humiliated and exploited by men who believed they were untouchable, she began, her voice steady and clear. Since that night, I have dedicated myself to ensuring that workers in this city receive the justice they deserve. She paused, letting her eyes sweep across the crowd of reporters and onlookers. The Whitmore development case is not about revenge, it is about accountability. It is about creating a system where companies cannot profit from the exploitation of workers. It is about ensuring that justice applies equally regardless of your bank account or family name. She clicked on the presentation behind her, showing the numbers. 147 workers compensated. $312 million in restitution. 32 criminal referrals pending. We have proven that even the most powerful are not above the law. And we have sent a message to every corporation in this city. If you cheat your workers, we will come for you. We will dismantle your empire piece by piece. We will ensure that you face consequences. The reporters erupted with questions, but Kendra was already stepping away from the microphone. She had said what needed to be said. The legal system would do the rest. Inside the courthouse, the proceedings moved quickly. The bankruptcy judge, a stern woman named Margaret Foster, who had been on the bench for 20 years, reviewed the settlement Kendra had negotiated. "This is quite extraordinary," Judge Foster said, looking up from her documents. "You've managed to recover far more than is typical in these situations. How did you accomplish this?" "Thorough investigation and aggressive negotiation," Kendra replied, standing before the bench with confidence earned through skill rather than connections. "We followed the money, every hidden account, every offshore shell corporation, every bribe paid to facilitate fraud." Trent sat at the defendant's table, looking utterly defeated. His lawyer, a competent but uninspired attorney from a mid-tier firm, had nothing left to argue. The evidence was overwhelming. The settlement was generous compared to what Trent deserved. "Ms. Lawson, I've followed your career over the past few years," Judge Foster said. "Your workers' rights initiative has set new standards for corporate accountability. I assume Whitmore Development is not your last case?" "Not by a long shot, Your Honor," Kendra replied. "There are hundreds of companies exploiting workers across this state. We intend to pursue every single one." Judge Foster smiled slightly, a rare expression on her typically stern face. "Good. This city needs advocates like you." She turned to the assembled parties. "The court approves the settlement as negotiated. Whitmore Development is hereby dissolved effective immediately. All assets are transferred to receivership. The distribution plan outlined by Ms. Lawson's firm is approved and shall commence within 30 days. She banged her gavel, and it was done. As the courtroom emptied, Trent approached Kendra. His lawyer tried to stop him, but he waved her away. "You've taken everything," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "I've taken what you stole," Kendra replied. "Your father built this company on the backs of people who had nothing. I'm simply returning what was taken from them." Trent looked at her with something that might have been respect if it wasn't colored by such profound defeat. "Do you ever think about that night?" he asked. "At the restaurant?" "Sometimes," Kendra admitted. "But not in the way you might think. I don't fantasize about revenge or imagine crushing you. I think about it as a turning point, the moment I stopped being invisible." "And now?" "Now you're invisible," she said simply. "That's the real punishment, isn't it? Not the money or the company or the legal consequences. It's knowing that you don't matter, that the world will move on without you, that your name, once synonymous with power, will become a footnote in a bankruptcy filing." Trent walked away without another word. Outside the courthouse, Minho was waiting for her, leaning against a black car with the casual grace of a man accustomed to power. He had positioned himself where he could see her emerge, a constant presence that had become as essential to her life as breathing. "It's done," Kendra said as she approached. "Not entirely," Minho replied, opening the car door for her. "But the important part is—" They drove through the city streets, Kendra watching the familiar landscape pass by her window. The restaurant where she had worked seemed smaller somehow, less imposing. She wondered what the current staff looked like, whether any of them faced the same struggles she had. "I've been thinking about what's next," Minho said, as the car turned toward his private office building. "The Workers' Rights Initiative has grown beyond Horizon's capacity to handle it. You need your own organization, independent, focused entirely on advocacy rather than corporate law." Kendra turned to look at him. "My own organization?" "You've proven you can do this," Minho continued. "More than proven it. You don't need the firm. You don't need me. You need a platform to expand your work." "I need you," Kendra said, and the words came out more honestly than she intended. "For business advice, for connections, for—" She trailed off, unable to articulate the complicated ways he had become essential to her. "I know," Minho said gently. "And you'll have all of that, but you need to be your own person, not defined by me or Horizon or anyone else. You've spent enough time building on someone else's foundation. It's time to build your own." They arrived at his office building, and Minho guided her to the penthouse elevator. This was their ritual on Friday evenings: dinner, conversation, and the kind of intimacy that existed in the space between friendship and love. Over sushi that Minho had prepared himself, they discussed the logistics of forming a new organization. Kendra would need funding, board members, office space, staff. Minho offered to provide the first and facilitate the second. Everything else she would build herself. "I'm proud of you," he said at one point, and the words carried the weight of absolute sincerity. "Not just for what you've accomplished professionally, though that's extraordinary, but for who you've become. You could have become bitter after what happened to you. Instead, you became determined to prevent it from happening to others." "I had a good example," Kendra replied. "You showed me what it looks like to take your pain and transform it into purpose." They sat on his apartment balcony, looking out at the city lights stretching to the horizon. Kendra had come to love this view, the way it made the entire world seem within reach. "There's something I want to ask you," Minho said quietly. "And I want you to know that I'm asking not as your mentor or your boss, but as a man who cares deeply about you." Kendra's heart rate quickened. She thought she knew what was coming, had sensed it building for months, but she wasn't sure how she wanted to respond. "Marry me," he said simply. She turned to look at him, seeing the vulnerability beneath his composed exterior. This powerful man, who commanded empires and bent city politicians to his will, was asking her to be his partner in a way that transcended business. "I can't," she said, and felt him flinch. "Not yet." "Because of our professional relationship?" "Because I need to know that I chose this for myself, not because it was offered to me," Kendra explained. "You saved me that night at the restaurant. You gave me opportunities when I had none. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. But I need to make my own choices now. I need to build my own life and stand on my own foundation." Minho was quiet for a long moment, processing her words. "How long?" he asked finally. "Give me a year," Kendra said. "Let me establish my foundation. Let me become fully independent. And then, if you still want to marry me, I'll say yes, knowing that I chose you, not that you chose me." A smile spread across his face, slow and genuine. "1 year," he agreed. "But I'm confident in my chances." "You should be," Kendra replied, "but you have to earn it." That night, as Kendra returned to her apartment and began drafting plans for her new organization, she thought about the girl she had been just 3 years ago. That girl had been invisible, powerless, trapped by circumstances she felt she couldn't change. That girl was gone. In her place stood a woman who could look any CEO in the eye and make them fear her. A woman who could dismantle empires with legal briefs and testimony. A woman who had learned that the greatest power came not from the people who helped you, but from the strength you discovered within yourself. And in 1 year, when Minho asked her again, she would say yes, not because she needed him, but because she wanted him. That was the kind of partnership she believed in, not dependence, but choice, not desperation, but deliberation. She opened a new document on her laptop and typed, Foundation for Worker Justice and Advocacy, Mission Statement. The first line read, Founded by Kendra Lawson, attorney and advocate. This organization is dedicated to ensuring that every worker, regardless of their economic status, has access to justice. There was no mention of Park Minho or Horizon Legal. This was hers, all hers. She worked through the night, fueled by coffee and purpose, building the architecture of something that would outlast her, would change the system in ways she could barely imagine. By the time dawn broke over the city, the foundation's structure was complete. And Kendra, exhausted but exhilarated, allowed herself to smile. Not the practiced smile of a server trying to survive her shift, not the confident smile of a lawyer in the courtroom, but a genuine smile of someone who had found her purpose and seized it with both hands. 1 year later, Kendra stood in front of the mirror in her apartment, adjusting the delicate lace of her wedding dress. The gown was simple but elegant, designed by a young Korean designer that Minho had recommended. Ivory silk with intricate beading that caught the light as she moved, creating the impression of stars scattered across her body. Her mother stood beside her, tears streaming down her face as she had been since Kendra emerged from the dressing room. "You're so beautiful, baby," Diane Lawson whispered, reaching out to smooth a strand of hair that had escaped Kendra's carefully arranged updo. "I still can't believe this is happening. My daughter marrying a man like that." "A man like what?" Kendra asked with a smile, knowing exactly what her mother meant but enjoying the opportunity to tease her. "A powerful man, a successful man. A man who looks at you like you hung the moon." Kendra squeezed her mother's hand. Diane Lawson had transformed over the past year almost as much as Kendra had. No longer worn down by exhaustion and financial struggle, she had blossomed into a woman of confidence and poise. She had taken classes in business management and now served on the board of the Foundation for Worker Justice, helping to shape its direction and policies. "He's just a man, Mom," Kendra said. "An extraordinary man, but still just a man." "That's where you're wrong, sweetheart. He's the man who saw your worth when you couldn't see it yourself. That makes him extraordinary in the most important way." A knock at the door announced that it was time. Kendra took one last look at herself in the mirror. The woman staring back was barely recognizable as the waitress from 4 years ago, but there was a thread connecting them, a continuity of spirit that had survived everything. The ceremony was held at a private venue overlooking the river, a space that Minho had rented for the day. The guest list was small but carefully curated. Colleagues from Horizon Legal, members of the Foundation's board, workers whose lives had been changed by Kendra's advocacy. Maria Gonzalez sat in the front row with her 3 children, all of them dressed in their finest clothes, beaming with pride. Kendra's walk down the aisle felt like a dream. Everything moved in slow motion, the faces of the guests blurring into a backdrop of support. And then she saw Minho, waiting at the altar in a perfectly tailored suit. His dark eyes locked on hers with an intensity that made her heart skip. He had kept his word over the past year. He had given her space to build her foundation, had offered guidance when requested, but never interfered. He had allowed her to stand alone, to prove to herself that she didn't need him to be successful. And in doing so, he had made her love him more than she ever thought possible. When she reached him, He took her hand, and a current of electricity passed between them. "You're gorgeous," he whispered, just loud enough for her to hear. "You're biased," she whispered back, hopelessly. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. They had written their own vows, both of them wanting to articulate exactly what this union meant beyond the legal contract. Kendra spoke first, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "Minho, you appeared in my life when I needed someone to believe in me. But more importantly, you taught me to believe in myself. You showed me that my struggles were not shameful, but powerful. You demonstrated that true strength comes not from privilege, but from the determination to overcome." She paused, looking into his eyes. "I marry you today, not because you saved me, but because you taught me how to save myself. I promise to stand beside you as an equal, to challenge you when necessary, to build something together that is greater than either of us alone. I love you not despite my independence, but because of it. I choose you, knowing I don't need you, which makes this choice real." There was not a dry eye in the room. Minho's vows were equally powerful, delivered in his calm, controlled voice that somehow made the words even more impactful. "Kendra, when I first saw you in that restaurant, I recognized something I thought I had lost long ago. Hope. Hope that the world could be changed. Hope that justice could be achieved. Hope that someone with nothing but determination and character could rise above their circumstances." He squeezed her hands gently. "You have exceeded every expectation I had. You have not only changed your own life, but you have changed the lives of thousands of others. I marry you today to build a future where we can continue that work together. I promise to support your ambitions, to challenge you when you're wrong, and to celebrate you when you're right. Most importantly, I promise to love you not as someone I saved, but as someone I respect. You are my equal in every way that matters. And I am honored to be your partner." When they kissed, the gathered guests erupted in applause. Through the joyful noise, Kendra felt a sense of completion. Not the completion of a story ending, but the completion of a chapter closing and a new one beginning. The reception was held in an elegant hall overlooking the water. Tables were arranged to encourage conversation, and the menu featured both Korean and American cuisine, a nod to both of their backgrounds. Kendra danced with her mother, who still couldn't stop crying happy tears. She danced with her father, a man she had barely known growing up but who had been present for the wedding, reconciliation slowly rebuilding their fractured relationship. And she danced with Minho, moving across the floor with a partner who had become as essential to her as air. "I told you I'd win you over," he said as they swayed together. "You didn't win me," Kendra corrected with a smile. "I chose you. There's a difference." "I'm aware. That's what makes this so satisfying." Later that night, after the guests had departed and the venue had been cleared, Kendra and Minho stood alone on the balcony overlooking the water. The city spread out before them like a map of conquered territory, each light representing someone they had helped, some injustice they had corrected. "I have something for you," Minho said, producing a small velvet box from his pocket. Kendra opened it to find not another ring, but a key made of white gold, delicate and beautiful. "The key to your heart?" she asked teasingly. "The key to a property I just purchased," he replied. "In Seoul, a house overlooking the river where I grew up. I thought, when you're ready, we could spend time there together. I'd like to show you where I come from, to introduce you to the people I knew before I built my empire." Tears sprang to Kendra's eyes. This was intimacy of a different kind, the willingness to be vulnerable with someone, to share not just your future but your past. "I'd like that," she said, leaning against him as they looked out at the city. "But maybe not for a while. We have work to do here." "I know," Minho agreed. "The foundation is growing faster than we anticipated. already discussing expansion into 3 new states. "And you're willing to support that?" Kendra asked. "To put my work ahead of Horizon's interests?" "Horizon will be fine," Minho said. "I've been in this business a long time. I know how to manage it, but what you're building, what you're creating with the foundation, that's something that will outlast both of us. That's worth devoting resources to." They stood in silence for a while, comfortable in the absence of words. This was one of the things Kendra loved most about Minho, his ability to be present without needing to fill every moment with conversation. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked eventually. "Taking me on as an intern? All the resources you've invested in me, the opportunities you've given me?" "Not for a second," Minho replied immediately. "You were the best investment I ever made, not financially, though the foundation has already generated enormous returns in terms of public relations and corporate partnerships, but personally. You gave me hope again, Kendra. For years, I was building an empire that meant nothing to me. I was accumulating power and money but losing myself in the process. And then you appeared, and suddenly everything had purpose again." He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "You saved me as much as I saved you. Don't ever forget that." The months that followed were a blur of activity and change. The Foundation for Worker Justice and Advocacy expanded rapidly, opening offices in New York, California, and Texas. Kendra hired brilliant lawyers and paralegals, all of them driven by the same mission to protect workers' rights. The organization became something of a legend in legal circles, taking on cases no one else would touch, winning settlements that set precedents. Kendra's name became synonymous with justice. Universities invited her to speak. Law schools wanted to hire her as a professor. International organizations asked her to consult on workers' rights initiatives. She had become exactly what she had dreamed of becoming, and more. But perhaps more importantly, she had become who she needed to be. A woman who stood tall in every room. A woman who didn't apologize for her ambition. A woman who used her power not to dominate others, but to lift them up. 2 years after her wedding, Kendra stood in front of a crowd of 500 workers at a union hall in downtown New York. The room was filled with people whose lives had been changed by her work. The construction workers who had recovered millions in stolen wages. The hotel housekeepers who now had legal protections. The delivery drivers who had successfully negotiated collective bargaining agreements. The domestic workers who had been granted basic labor rights that had previously been denied to them. "5 years ago," Kendra began, "I was one of you. I worked in a restaurant, serving people while barely able to feed myself. I was treated as if I was less than human. I was expected to accept abuse and exploitation as the price of employment. And then one night, I refused to kneel." She paused, letting the significance of those words settle over the crowd. "That refusal changed everything for me. But I realized that not everyone has the luxury of refusing. Not everyone has a savior waiting in the shadows. So I dedicated myself to creating a system where you don't need a savior. Where you have rights that are protected by law. Where exploitation comes with real consequences." She gestured to the screens behind her, displaying statistics on their victories. "Over the past 3 years, we have recovered $340 million in stolen wages. We have won legal protections for over 50,000 workers. We have shut down 15 companies for egregious violations of labor laws. And we are just getting started." The crowd erupted in applause, and Kendra felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was why she had fought so hard. Not for the accolades or the recognition, but for moments like this, when she could see the hope in people's eyes, the knowledge that someone was fighting for them. After the event, as Kendra was packing up her materials, a young woman approached her. She couldn't have been more than 20, with dark skin and tired eyes that held a familiar sadness. "Ms. Lawson," the woman said hesitantly, "my name is Ashley. I work at a restaurant downtown. My boss has been stealing from my tips, and I didn't know what to do. I came tonight hoping to talk to you about representing me." Kendra felt a jolt of recognition. This girl was her, 5 years ago. Same situation, same desperation, same hope that someone might actually help. "Tell me everything," Kendra said, guiding the girl to a quiet corner of the room. "And don't worry, we're going to make sure you get justice." As she listened to Ashley's story, Kendra thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The waitress serving ungrateful customers, the student balancing school and work, the young woman standing tall and refusing to kneel, the intern learning the law, the lawyer fighting for justice, the advocate changing systems. She had become everything she needed to become. Later that evening, as she was driving home through the city streets, Kendra received a text from Minho. "Proud of you. Come home to me." She smiled and changed her route toward their apartment, a beautiful space in the Upper East Side that they had decorated together, blending Minho's minimalist Korean aesthetic with Kendra's love of warmth and color. When she entered, Minho was waiting with dinner prepared, candles lit, and that rare, genuine smile on his face that made him look almost vulnerable. "You were extraordinary today," he said, pulling her close. "I have an extraordinary partner," she replied. They ate and talked late into the night, discussing cases and strategy and the future. And as Kendra looked at this man who had changed her life, she realized that her greatest victory wasn't the cases she had won or the workers she had helped, though those were important. Her greatest victory was herself, the woman she had become, the strength she had discovered, the power she had learned to wield with compassion and justice. 5 years ago, Kendra Lawson had been invisible. She had been dismissed as nobody, treated as if her worth could be measured in money or status. Now, she was seen, respected, feared by those who exploited workers, celebrated by those who fought for justice, and most importantly, she saw herself, clearly, completely, exactly as she was. A woman who had survived, who had thrived, who had transformed her pain into purpose, a woman who would never kneel again, and a woman who would spend the rest of her life ensuring that others never had to either. As she lay in bed that night, Minho's arms around her, Kendra thought about Ashley, the young woman she had met at the Union Hall. Tomorrow she would start working on Ashley's case. She would fight for her the way Minho had once fought for Kendra. The cycle would continue, not because the world was perfect, but because there were people willing to make it better. People who refused to accept that exploitation was inevitable. People who believed that dignity was a right, not a privilege. Kendra closed her eyes, feeling the weight of responsibility and the lightness of purpose in perfect balance. She had found her place in the world, not the place others had assigned to her, but the place she had carved out for herself through determination, courage, and an unwavering belief that justice was possible. The girl who had once served tables at La Maison Dorée was gone. In her place was Kendra Lawson, founder of the Foundation for Worker Justice and Advocacy, wife to a man who saw her as an equal, daughter to a mother who had sacrificed everything for her success. Most importantly, she was herself, fully, completely, unapologetically. And that was the greatest transformation of all. If this story touched your heart, wait until you see what's coming next. It's even more powerful and inspiring than you can imagine. So don't go anywhere. Click on that video showing on your screen right now to dive into another amazing story that will absolutely blow your mind. Trust me, you won't regret it.